Hello viewers and welcome back to Exhaust Notes. Dylan here with another car for you to check out. Citroën have just facelifted the Citroën C5 Aircross and done a few little updates along the way. And we're lucky enough to be one of the first to show you guys what the new one looks like. Let's check it out, shall we? Citroën is a French automaker that is no stranger to the Australian shores. This latest Aircross is now a single model variant. There's no real optional extras. There's no different levels of packages with this car. It's one model with everything on it. It is a really nice package all up, and Citroën are no strangers to trying to think outside the box, to be different, to do things differently to everyone else. And there's a couple of little quirky things on this that they've done to showcase that about themselves. So let's start from the rear to the front and check out the boot. The boot in the C5 is plenty big enough with the seats up, but with them down you have 1600 litres of boot space, which is almost enough in here to lay down and have a nap. You do have anchor points in the corner, a 12 volt socket, and plenty of room in here. You have a button on the key fob to close or a button on the tailgate. How good? Now what about the back seats? In the back of the C5 there is plenty of room in here for adults. It is pretty comfy. These seats are nice and plush with the Napa leather. You do have the second portion of the sunroof to enjoy. Lights back here, and these quick release tabs here are for all the seats in case you need to get into the back. Some nice storage compartments here, a USB in the middle, and some aircon vents. Overall, it's not bad for the size of the car. And we can't forget about the infotainment and the technology on board. The center infotainment is a combination of haptic buttons and touchscreen. So down here we've got our seat warmers on either end, then we've got music, air conditioning, navigation, car settings, and phone, and then your Android Auto, Apple CarPlay. It is touchscreen as well. As we can see, it's pretty responsive. Go to our aircon settings through there. Come back to here for profiles. Click that for the maps. It's not too slow. I wouldn't say it's one of the fastest ones, but it's not too slow either. Pretty easy to use and to understand how to use. I did find it hard to distinguish at first that these and these were buttons, but eventually you work it out. Underneath you have a couple of buttons here, so you got your auto stop start setting. You can turn your aircon off via the button itself. This is actually volume, and you got your heating up your windows there as well, and your recirculation of air. Under that you have a charge pad with some USBs and a 12 volt. Then through the middle here we've got our start stop button. We do have a hill descent, which is interesting. Our gear selector, P is a button and M is a button as well to engage those two gear settings. Then we have our drive modes, which I'll show you a bit later on. We have a nice big bin here for your wallet, two cup holders which actually have little teeth in them, which is awesome, and a double opening center glove box. But this also moves around. What is amazing though is how deep this goes. What the heck? One thing I did find interesting about the Citroën C5 is all of your cruise control settings are on this extra lever here, but this lever doesn't actually move. They're all buttons attached to it. Just something to be aware of, because the first initial thing was you would pull that forwards or backwards to initiate. So you actually turn it on via this, and then you set your gap and you can pause it, or your memory settings. You can also tell it to update to the speed sign as you're going. You can see here on the steering wheel we have rather large buttons actually, which I feel like you could make these smaller and fit a few more on there, but fair enough. we do have our paddles here. Now the paddles themselves, they don't move. They've actually got another bit of plastic over the top, and when you click on that, that's what actually changes the gear. Personally, I'm not a big fan of that. I would prefer an actual lever. It just seems a little bit on the cheap side, but it does do the job. Now I'll move on to the gauge cluster. Now it's a pretty simple layout. You can adjust it quite heavily. So what I'm going to do now is just flow through the settings here. So we can change to drive mode. We can then go down to navigation, which I do like. It does have the map in here, which is pretty good. Very nice. Then you got your personal. Me, I put the map in here as well as my trip settings and everything else in the middle. And you can have a very minimal look. So yeah, very nice and interactive. I think they did a good job here. And go back around. So I'll just leave it on the dials for now. Very good. One thing I will say that might trick a few people, as you can see, there's a few pages there. Now if you actually go over here on the end of the stalk, you press that and it goes through the different pages for you, just so you know how to do that. Next up, we will go through the drive modes. There's actually a lot of drive modes in this car. So we've got Sport. Now for me, Sport was too aggressive on the throttle. I didn't really like it. It seemed a bit jolty while you're using it, so I didn't tend to use Sport very much. Normal is where I did most of my driving in this car. It was the most comfortable and easy to use, and worked well with how I drive. We've got Eco. I gave Eco a try. For me, Eco had not enough throttle, so Sport probably had too much throttle percentage. Eco has probably not enough throttle percentage for a comfy cruisy ride. So what I found in Eco mode was you tended to be really slow off the mark at the lights. You would see it go green, you'd put your foot on the throttle, and there was a delay before the car actually got going how you wanted it to. Like when you have one of those slow drivers in front of you and you're like, what's going on? It's exactly like that, but the car's doing it. So wasn't a big fan. There is a bunch of off-road modes, so sand, mud, and snow. Now being a front-wheel drive car, I feel like these three settings really would just limit your traction and make sure that you always have plenty there available, which is fair enough. I can't imagine they do too much otherwise. Back to normal, and we'll get back to driving. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about how this car drives. Let's start with the power plant. The engine is actually not too bad, a 1.6 litre turbo, front wheel drive. It's not a bad power plant. It feels zippy for the size of this car, and it feels great around town, it really does. The gearbox is an 8-speed automatic, and I don't mind it. I do find it's not very eventful, which is probably what you want in an everyday car. If you're driving this every day to and from all your daily duties, you don't really care about it being an eventful sort of car. So for that, they've made this exceptionally comfortable in terms of the gear changes. They're seamless. Even in manual mode, they're seamless. I do have a little bit of a problem with the shifters that are manual here. They just feel a little bit cheaper than they need to be to me. Being that they're plastic and they don't actually click or move, I should say, when you do want to change gears. It's just a different way of doing things, and it's just not one that I particularly like, but it may not bother you. I have found with this car that I haven't found myself going too crazy with wanting to be in manual mode, doing things myself. I've really found this car more comfortable in just letting it do its own thing. With the drive modes that I showed you earlier, what I found is that sport mode for me was a little bit too responsive on the throttle. The throttle percentage there is probably just a little bit high, and so you kind of tend to be a little bit jerky in the car. Wasn't really too much of a fun experience, but in normal mode I found it lovely. And to be honest, this is probably one of the first cars I've driven where normal mode for me was the one I used the most. It was really comfy, really seamless, really smooth. I found eco mode to be a little bit not enough throttle, so taken off at the lights you just seem to be very slow to get going in eco mode, and I just wasn't really a fan of that. You You do also have the other modes for off-roading, your mud, snow, and sand, I think it was. And I feel like they would just be basically different levels of managing the torque on the front wheels, just to help you a little bit. But being a front wheel drive, you're probably not going to be doing too much off-roading in this thing anyway. Now, in terms of the ride comfort, I think they have done a superb job in this car. It is actually really, really comfortable. Being that it's not too heavy and that you sit so high in it, they've helped the suspension feel kind of similar. You do have that top heavy kind of weight feel, but it's not too much. And what you get in return for that feeling is a really comfy and absorbent ride. It absorbs plenty of bumps. There's not too much road noise. It is really comfy. And when you combine that with this engine and gearbox and letting it do its own thing, what you end up getting is a ride that you end up getting from A to B, and you kind of almost dazed out of it, and you don't remember the drive because it was that comfortable. You were focusing on other things, and it was just easy. It was nice and easy and cruisy. Really good fuel efficiency out of this thing. I personally have been getting, let me just double check it, make sure it hasn't changed, 7 litres per 100. I wouldn't say I've been driving it very hard, so that's what I would say a reasonable driving number of petrol is for this car, about a 7, which is a little bit higher than what they rated it at, I believe. So that's okay. Some people drive with a heavy foot, that might be me. I was pretty impressed with this car to find that there is a special button on the side of this seat that can give you a massage. And for me, having that in a car at this level is a job well done by Citroën. Good job for them putting that in here. I do find the seats with the Nappa leather, and they have this really nice sort of, I would almost call it like an airbag feel. Like there's like almost like a water mattress. The seats are kind of soft and a bit spongy, and it just again adds to that comfort of the ride in this car. I drove to Sydney twice this week, and it was such a comfy drive. It really was. It's comfier than most cars I've been in. It's I can't rave about that enough with this car. It really is a nice ride, and it's a pretty quiet ride. The engine's not too noisy. There's not much road noise coming into this thing. You have your heated seats. You got a massage. I like how the GPS can come into the gauge cluster here. I like the customization that you can do to that for yourself. I personalized this to have the GPS on one side, all my driving dynamics in the middle, and just my trip advice on the left. I quite liked having all of that on the screen at all times. It's rather nice. The layout is pretty good in this gauge cluster. And the infotainment, I found it not too slow, but also probably not that fast either. It's just enough. I'd say it's okay. I do like the wireless charging bay. It's all pretty easy to navigate here, and the combination of buttons and touchscreen, it works just fine, really. The way the shifter is in the dash, I was a bit funny at first because it's like actually embedded down into the dash. There's no stalk at all, but that's the way everyone's going. And on this car, honestly, its response is just fine. One thing I will say for people who are going to look at driving one of these cars is, just so you're aware, the P and the M in the selector lights actually are buttons. So when you want to actually put the car in park, you press the P button down. When you want to put it in the manual, you either click a paddle or you press the M button and it goes to manual for you, while the other 3 are just lights connected to the shifter scroll that is next to it. I do find everything is laid out here rather nice and spatially. I found the compartments here for storage are unreal. Like the compartment here for the wallet, you could fit a full-blown purse in there if you're like a full old school almost with a shoulder strap on it. It would fit in there just fine. The center compartment here, absolutely gigantic. Honestly, you could fit, I reckon I could put my little dog Kenny in there and he'd be fine almost. Who knows what's hiding down there. I do think that an optional extra for this car that would have been good is actually to have that as a fridge or a cooling area. I reckon it would have worked just fine, and there's plenty of room in there to fit a little tiny refrigerator. I like the overall finish of this car. Like, this car is, I wouldn't say it's got expensive materials by any means, but the way they've used what they had, it looks stylish, it looks different, and it stands out next to its competitors just for being different than everyone else. I do like that about this car. There is something about it that just feels a little bit different to everyone else. And for that, it might just be your cup of tea, this car. It's a car that you've really got to, if you're looking in this kind of type of vehicle for this one, then I would test this against the other cars that you're considering and just see what you think. There is definitely plenty to like here. I think the back seats are fine in this space. And overall, it's really not a bad package. I like that there's only one level of trim in this car. It's one, and you get everything. You get the sunroof, you get everything as is, and there's no base model, top end model, or anything to worry about in the middle. I do find it a little bit odd in terms of all the buttons and the technology. The only thing that I find a little bit strange is on the steering wheel, we have these really, really big buttons for the volume and some scrolls and things like that. And then we've got to put all our cruise control onto an extra stalk, and that stalk almost feels like the old school cruise control, but it doesn't actually move, much like the paddles. It's actually got extra buttons on it. So it takes you a minute to kind of work that out. And then you look at the buttons on the steering wheel, which are gigantic, and you wonder why you wouldn't just have smaller buttons and fit it all into one. It's a bit odd for me. I personally would probably prefer the buttons, just so I don't have to worry about an extra stalk, but each to their own. Everything still works as you'd expect, and it all works rather well. They did add a bit of safety with the facelift, so you do have your adaptive cruise, you have your traffic sign recognition, your lane keep. I found the air conditioning is really good in this car. It's really exceptional. Heats up rather quickly, no issues with that. The Android Auto connectivity was all fine. Bluetooth works fine. I like the automatic tailgate as well. That's again another feature that pretty much every sort of wagon or hatch-like car should pretty much have these days. It is really helpful. And your vision in this car is really good. There's not too many blind spots, and because you're sitting high in the car, you just have a really nice feel of the vision around the car. You feel like you can see what's going on everywhere. You never feel like you're struggling to park it or anything like that. It's a good size, it's a good weight, and the performance matches the level of the car as an everyday driver. The wrap up on the Citroën C5 Aircross. I think as a package they've done a really good job here. This is a great daily driver car. Plenty of room. You'll fit the whole family in if you need. Nice and still economical. Even though I was getting higher than what is rated, it is still an economical drive. And it is so comfy. It is such a comfy car. But the big gripe I have with that is, even though there's a few things that I think could be better, the price of this car I think is just really just a little bit too high. At $59,990 drive away, that is a lot of money for this car. And for that reason, I would say I recommend you drive one, but I feel like you would only really pick this car if it really style-wise sung to you. And I do think it'll sing to a lot of people that like the styling, because the exterior is styled just right. It is really nice, and the interior I feel matches the exterior in terms of the style level. You have a really good level of both in here. They match each other really well, and for that reason, yeah, they've nailed the styling, they've nailed the scope of the car in terms of fitting to most people's preferences, and they've added just a few little extra things in there that are really handy, like the automatic tailgate, the sunroof, and the massage seats. They're all nice little cherries on top of this package. So if you like the look of it, definitely go and test drive one and see how you feel. But yeah, that price, I feel if they can do anything about that, it would be handy. But otherwise, job well done, and they've nailed the rest of it. Thanks guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. It was a pretty simple one. This is a nice simple car. There's plenty going on and it's easy to explain. If you like what you saw here, like and subscribe, and we'll get you some more cool stuff soon. See you later.